Hello, this is Eric, and I just went to the theater and watched Ready Player One. Now, those of you who have been here for a while or look back in our archives will notice that I had a pretty visceral reaction to the Ready Player One trailer because I didn't like the book and I really didn't like the trailer, so I thought I'd let you guys know what I thought of the actual film. Now, the movie actually shares some of the problems that I had with the book. It was overly materialistic at times. The main character was quite a bit selfish for the vast majority of the film. The lessons don't exactly connect with the story it's trying to tell, and the relationships between different characters are rather shallow. I mean, the death of his aunt in the stacks when it blew up, much like the actual book, I didn't really care that much. It was just, we don't really get any time to know her, and the most that we know of her relationship with Waithe is she kind of yells at him for touching her stuff for a little while. Much like the book, it seemed like it was more framed as a plot device instead of, him actually caring about her death. Immediately after the stacks blew up, he's whisked away into another scene, and we just kind of forget about it until it pops up later when he's like, "You killed my aunt," or not aunt, sorry, he says, "You killed my mother's sister," and it just felt really impersonal. His relationship with Artemis is actually similar in a way, but different. They don't know each other, and I know that's kind of the Hollywood romance type thing, but when you're impressing upon people the idea that the relationships in the game aren't actually real or anything like that, when you're trying to communicate points where online relationships are delving into and having themes and lessons along those lines, having a weak relationship like that and not actually rolling it into any of the plots or subplots or anything else, it doesn't really do anything for the film. Much like in the actual story, it's her entire reason for hesitating to be with him is, "I have a birthmark, so I'm ugly and you'll reject me." He's like, "Nope, that's just fine. All problems completely solved. We can be in a romantic relationship all you want." And while the villains of the story, the IOI, actually, it went more into detail with them and gave more of the villain's perspective of things, they were still a rather generic corporate enemy coming in and ruining the fun of everyone who's free-willed and wants everything to be free and hunky-dory and not under corporation control. And the villain is quite sociopathic, killing his aunt just because it's just business. But it doesn't really work when we don't really know the aunt to begin with. I digress. One of my major problems with the actual book was the bountiful 80 reference pile. The original Halliday in the book just loved the 80s and so filled every single step of the way with 80s references. Figuring out the Easter eggs wasn't necessarily about actually figuring out the clues so much as memorizing a lot of 80s references and making random connections until you suddenly figure out the mystery. It didn't take really any skill or thought or cleverness. It was just knowing enough 80s references wins. In the movie, they actually changed it up to have more modern references and actually use those to kind of get ahead in some areas, the Iron Giant crashing through the big army of Sixers and whatnot. But even then, I was thinking, in even 10 years, are people actually going to get these references? Are they going to see Tracer and think, "Oh, hey, look, that's Tracer from Overwatch"? I mean, yeah, it's kind of sad that these bits and pieces of cultural identity are kind of being lost just simply due to time, but what makes references work is when there's something a bit more to it, when you can enjoy it as more than just a reference and be able to take whatever it's being used for, humor or maybe just a bit of awesome, and you can do something a bit more with it that becomes a source of timeless enjoyment. In the actual 2040s, people are probably going to look back at this and it's going to seem severely outdated. Yeah, the story by itself kind of holds up on its own, but there's a lot of references that made it the movie a bit more awesome. Like The Shining. I found myself just laughing throughout that entire scene, mostly because I laugh at horror, but even still, because I got that reference, I enjoyed it more. If I didn't know what the reference was, I'd be confused about why there's blood spilling out of the elevator and why there's a naked old woman with an axe. It just kind of seemed like a random element thrown in. And seeing that, and looking back at the book with 90% 80s references that I don't understand, even despite being a 90s kid, I can see that future generations aren't going to enjoy it as much as this one. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I dislike the film. I'm disappointed by it, but I'll get to why later. The movie actually fixes a lot of little problems and adds a whole bunch of little things that actually helped the story along. They got rid of the arbitrary escape scene. It replaced that, I think, with Samantha actually being caught by the Sixers for her father's outstanding debt and whatnot, and actually working that into the plot a lot better than I think the book handled it. And it actually put effort into making sure that the real selves were always in danger, so that the consequences for failing were a lot more tangible than just, our avatars are dead. Well, better start over. It even added quite a bit of personality to the enemies and some minor characters, you know. It had one of the Japanese guys, who I think was actually killed off in order to show the consequences in the book. I think that they turned him into an 11-year-old, and that 11-year-old was just awesome. That's the only thing that you can really call that. As well as having kind of the mercenary assassin. I don't think Irock, I don't think he was actually in the book. Not if I remember correctly. He may have been a minor character at some point, but he didn't really make that much of an impact. He was actually like a real gamer, the kind of MMO player that goes out and spends hours upon hours accumulating as much awesome loot as possible. He was pretty great and added some necessary moments of humor, I think. Just, the people who made this movie did very well. I could tell that they were very passionate about their project, and they put a lot of effort into making this actually feel like a good movie, on top of being written and acted and directed as such. And it had a lot more potential than the book did. I have to wonder, because Ernest Cline was actually credited with writing some of the screenplay, I have to wonder how much his writing, this being, his baby, I have to wonder how much that held the film back, being stuck with the book the way it was, and kept it from making the next step. I could kind of see what they were doing with Halliday and his memories. He was a guy that really couldn't connect with people except over the Oasis. It just didn't really do anything other than inform his character, which is bizarre because you've got a lot of setup for a lot of things. Waithe is kind of in that similar mentality and could learn from Halliday. And I mean, the villain, when he walked up to that van and aimed his gun at Waithe, who had just found the Easter egg, there wasn't any real emotional reason for him to stop. Like, oh no, I respect my enemy for some reason, because he didn't really in the film. He was more of a sociopath. He killed someone's aunt just for business reasons. It wasn't personal. And then there wasn't any real logical reason behind it either, because even if Parzival had just actually found the Easter egg, there's nothing keeping you from killing the guy. Wade's signed no contracts. He's basically not even got ownership of the company yet. He's found the Easter egg, but that doesn't really have any legal basis for anything that we're aware of. I mean, even forgetting that the mob that came for him seemed pretty willing to risk their lives for one of their own, but they just stepped out of the way for the gun, even when one of them could just take a bat to his head as he walked past. Ignore that. Those are just my little nitpicks. And then there's the whole thing with Waithe kind of worshipping Halliday along with, all the other gamers, but Halliday's actually just this guy who just really couldn't connect with people, and you would think that maybe we could develop some connection between Waithe and Halliday, but it just wasn't really explored all that much. And then there's that thing with Ogden. I mean, the guy had a falling out with his friend, but he loved the guy so much that he actually became the guardian for this guy's memories. Even after trying to explain something really important to Halliday, and Halliday just not getting it, and them having to separate over, business stuff happens quite often in the real world. It's sad, but even after all of that, he didn't actually let it really ruin his feelings for Halliday. He became the guy that took people in and showed them his friend. He gave them as much of his friend as possible because he loved him. It's really, really powerful stuff, and it's not capitalized on at all. It just sits there informing Ogden's character, even though Ogden didn't really have that much of a role to play. It's just sad how much it's wasted. Because this could have been a really emotionally powerful movie. Not about consumerism or the greed of corporations or reality being real, which doesn't make any sense because the Oasis helped them form real-world connections just as easily as going out and meeting them in real life would have. Yeah, that issues. But if you really wanted a story about greedy corporations and consumerism and all that, set in the future and playing on all that, I would really recommend Jennifer Government, which, as far as I'm aware, is only a book, but it's a pretty good one. No, this could have been a really powerful story about making connections, whether the real counts as much as the virtual, how some people who just, they can't make normal friendships, how they can use the masks and anonymity of the internet, or the Oasis in this case, in order to actually have real bonds. Things that are important, far more important than anything that IOI has in mind for the Oasis. Alongside that could be things about friendship and what friendship really means and what a dedication to a friendship actually really entails. This story in the movie, not the one in the book, but the one in the movie I could see people crying if it was done right. I could see people gasping in horror when people are killed, like the aunt. We don't need another action-heavy thriller set in a virtual environment questioning the nature of reality and all that. We already have, The Matrix and The Inception if we really, really want that. And there's plenty more clones and copies and other things that play with the idea that are also out there. But we don't have, as far as I'm aware, a story that actually goes through and deals with the complexities of virtual relationships and what they mean. We don't have that story where someone who can't make friends in any sort of real environment can just become someone else and actually make lasting bonds through a virtual environment. We don't have a story of someone's life like Halliday's changing so utterly just by him basically putting on a mask. And we don't see how that affects real-life relationships, and we don't have a lesson that it adds up to. And that was my biggest disappointment, not the nitpicks or anything to do with the book, but that I was waiting on the edge of my seat for it to actually take that next step and go from average to great, and it just didn't do it. Man, I almost want to go to Dan and just make a fixer-upper video right now about this. Seeing as how they went so far and they fixed so much with the book, and they came so close to something great, almost a masterpiece, and they just fell short. The trailer completely sucked and was on par with my expectations for the book, but the movie? Well, those were my thoughts on Ready Player One. It was just so close, but so far. I really want to hear what your guys' thoughts are, so please leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell button. Have a nice day, guys.